Hi everyone, good morning. This is Richello Mataro, BSI third year. So I'll be discussing mental frames, the framing bias, and the consequences of deciding with blinders. So let's talk about mental frames. So a frame of reference or point of view refers to the way we look at a given situation. How person views that situation can affect her understanding of the facts and influence how she determines right from wrong. Some frames minimize or even omit the ethical aspect of a decision. So, in an example, I have like an image on the left side of this PowerPoint. So, we have two burgers with um, post of 75% fat free and 25% fat. So, as you can see there, right, since again framing describes how our responses to the situation, including our ethical judgments, we can judge depends on how we see the thing, how we see it, how we view it. So it will also impact it just how those situations are posed or being viewed. Okay, so based on our example, we have two burgers here with different names or nickname. So the one on the left side is 75% fat free and 25% fat on the right side. So of course, if I'm a consumer, I would rather choose the 75% fat free compared to 25% fat, because again, as a person, I want good health, right? So probably 75% fat free is much cheaper than 25% fat, or probably um, the burger on the left with 75% fat free um is more delicious than the other one compared to the other one, right? So it depends on how it's being viewed, right? Since you can see on the picture, there are a lot of people you know going in line and waiting for the 75% fat free. Okay, so let me move on the next slide. Okay, so let's watch this short video on how um, clearly discuss um, about framing. Okay.
In any kind of decision making, context counts. The simple reframing of a situation or a question can produce a totally different answer from the same person. For example, people would rather buy a hamburger made of meat labeled 75% fat free than meat labeled 25% fat. In fact, when questioned, these people will tell you that the 75% fat free burger tastes better than the 25% fat burger, even though the burgers are identical.
How an issue is framed is definitely one of the most important parts of when you're considering something.
Of course, when people are framing things, they're going to try to make it as good as possible. They're not going to show you the bad, they're not going to show you the negative.
When NASA was deciding whether to launch the ill fated Space Shuttle Challenger, Horton Thiokol's engineers at first opposed the launch on safety grounds. But when the general manager instructed the engineers to put on their management hats, he reframed the decision from one focusing on safety to one focusing on dollars and cents. The engineers then, unfortunately, changed their decision. We need to look beyond the obvious frame of reference in business, will this be a profitable decision, and consider our actions from a broader ethical perspective. Like, how will this look when it's reported on the front page of the newspaper?
So right now there's the big abortion debate in Washington, and I think that's a really good example of framing, because you have two groups of people with noble goals. There are people that want to protect women's health and reproductive issues, but then there's also people that want to protect the lives of the unborn children.
When you have an issue explained to you, you have to examine how it's framed, because people that are explaining issues to you are biased in themselves.
Decisions made by business people often occur in a context where subjective factors predominate, and the framing of an issue is particularly influential. In Enron's declining days, the company attempted to save money by encouraging employees to minimize travel expenses. An Enron employee later wrote that he intentionally flouted the new policy. While this seems like a clear ethical lapse, in the employee's mind, he deserved to stay in the most expensive hotels and to eat at the best restaurants because of how very hard he was working. He framed the issue in terms of his narrow self interest and not in the broader ethical context of adhering to company policy.
There was a class that I had a homework assignment in, and I forgot about it. I just straight forgot. When I emailed the teacher and said I forgot, I didn't necessarily say it as plainly as, oh, I just forgot about it. Is there any chance I can still do it? I put a little bit of a spin on it of, I've been really busy, and there was this, and there was that, and I'm so sorry I didn't get to it.
CFOs and accounting personnel at Enron, Health South, and other scandal ridden companies didn't need a philosophy course to help them figure out that their manipulation of financial statements was unethical. Their problem was that at the time of their actions, their frame of reference was loyalty to the company and to the company's goal of maximizing stock price. Had those employees been able to think in terms of the bigger ethical picture, for example, the impact of their action on other people's pension funds, they might have acted differently.
One of the things you can do is try to have as much information about it as possible from as many different views as possible.
Asking other people, preferably obviously third-party people, if somebody that the decision doesn't affect whatsoever.
Making sure that you're constantly challenging yourself and your ideas about what you believe in.
It's kind of being cognizant of who you're talking to, what they're feeling, where they're coming from. For me, it helps if I have other people to bounce ideas off of and other people that have very different backgrounds from me that can really call me if I'm not evaluating a certain issue.
Okay, and that's the end of the video. So it clearly, explain what really framing is. And again, the summary to summarize what we watch, right? Framing involves social construction of a social phenomenon. So by mass media sources, political or social movements, political leaders, or other actor and organizations, right? So participation in a language community necessarily influences an individual's perception of the meanings attributed to the words and phrases. So that's why the person earlier was saying that it is much better to um, get enough information for you to be able to make sure that your decisions are 100% um, result to a positive um, um, response. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the mental frame. So the mental frames help a humankind or a human think or see a passive way to solve the situation. Some humans solve their problems using frustrations without knowing that their way of solving it is wrong. So without mental framing, negativity in solving problems will always occur, and that will make our solving ways wrong. Now, in some instances, it would result to depression, and it will cause the person to ask the reason for their existence. No, and we always need to look at the positive side. Most importantly, if problems occurs, we should take note that mental framing is here remind us that the problems are natural to exist, for it is part of life to help us live to the fullest. Okay, so what is the framing bias? Framing bias occurs when people decide based on the way the information was presented. So, as opposed to just on the fact themselves, the same fact presented to different ways can lead to people making different judgment or decision. So there will be confusion. So there are two examples with different same product but different explanation. So people will have two thinking now, or will would think now which one is best for them, right? So there are type of framing. So first we have the auditory frame, visual frames, value frames, and positive and negative frames. So let's move on to auditory frames. These frames tend to be a bit more nuisance, but we can look at both ends of the spectrum to make the point. For instance, a car salesman says to us in a shy and naive way, "How can I help you today?" They don't sound confident, so they are unlikely to get our attention or sale. They don't sound confident. Okay. Um, but in contrast, no, we have a confident, well-spoken car salesman who asks us, "How can I help you today?" So the same words, but just spoken with more confidence and more suitable inflection, right? So the voice inflection can be crucially important. In fact, it is more important than what we are actually saying, what we actually said. At the same time, the speed and the volume are also important when framing, right? So remember that it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. So for visual frames, looking at the picture below, we have two images of the same picture, one with a pink background and the other one with a more neutral gray background. Now the pink one is potentially more eye-catchy, but won't appeal to most men, right? So if you're a girl, you would rather choose the one with the background of color pink, right? It's the same image but framed differently. So for let's move on to value frames. So for value frames, higher number tends to mean better value, right? So example, a 90% discount is better than 50%, obviously, right? That's obvious. But when we play around with the framing, we can see the difference, right? Example, we have two Macs here are currently selling for $600. Susan needs or you needs to choose between the two options. So we have the option one, which is 20% of MacBooks, and option two is $120 of MacBooks. So if you are the consumer, which do you prefer from the two option? Okay. So of course, I would rather choose the one with the lower price. Okay. Next, positive and negative frames. So when we talk about positive and negative frames, we can look at the classic example of a glass half full or is it half empty. Many marketers use such negative frames to get us to take an action to buy their product. So I know you experienced this, right? You may recollect phrases such "Don't miss out," you last your last chance to save. So I know you've heard that before when you are in a mall or you are in a market. So the frame is simple: make people feel like they are losing something. As stated in prospect theory, people tend to fear the take action to avoid losses more than gains. So when we may lose out on a good deal, we are encouraged to act. Right. Next, so what are the consequences of deciding with blinders? Okay, the meaning of the word blinders means unable to be aware of or recognize what is happening around us. Right. There are plenty of problems cropping around us is due to the phenomenon called bounded awareness. Bounded awareness can be defined as a well-documented observation that people routinely overlook important information during the decision making process. So the main problem that causes this is the tendency to overfocusing on one point, resulting in a missing important information and which is happening outside the focus point. Okay, so what is the consequence, right, if we do that? Okay. So if we are failing to see information, of course failure to see information often puts people in trouble. So this is not a good thing to to do, right? And of course we have the failure to seek information. You see, but you are not seeking. You are failing to use the information that you seek. And lastly is you fail to share the information you use, right? So it's very important that we again share information to others in a team, in a group, so in that way they will learn as well, same as you. Okay, so I think that's all for me. Thanks for I hope you learned something.